Jesus Camp. Jesus Camp is the exemplar film for our socialization unit. And Jesus Camp is all about socialization. It exemplifies a specific type of uh, agent of socialization, the total institution. Total institution. A total institution is one where the residents are mostly cut off from the outside world. They may be able to have some limited contact, but they're largely cut off, and they are under almost total control of the supervisory staff. The primary purpose for a total institution is to re-socialize its residents. So a classic example would be a penitentiary. Historically, prisons were designed to re-socialize their inmates, to convert them from deviant members of society to conforming members of society. And this is built into the names we have for these institutions. Penitentiary comes from penitent, the idea that it was that you'd be locked away and become penitent for what you had done. A reformatory, another term for such an institution that has the idea of reform or resocialization built into the name. Nowadays, prisons have less and less resocialization and are more about punishment, but we still have it in the language. Other examples would be basic training, boot camp in the military. Other examples would be convents or monasteries where novices are brought in to learn how to be monks or nuns. Some boarding schools are total institutions, and some summer camps are total institutions. Not all summer camps. Some summer camps, perhaps most summer camps, exist just so parents can get their children out of their hair for a while, and the children are there just there to be entertained. But there are summer camps at which socialization of the children is the primary purpose. Clearly, Jesus Camp is one of those. There are fat camps where children are socialized to change their eating and exercise habits and to lose weight. There are gay conversion camps where the counselors try to stop the children from being gay. So clearly Jesus Camp is a total institution. The children are largely cut off from the outside world for the time that they are at camp, and the purpose of the camp is to socialize those children into the norms and values of the supervisory staff at the camp. In the movie, we also see examples of socialization at home with regards to the homeschooling. In the homeschooling scenes, you saw some remarkable teaching. My personal conception of schooling is that it is a way to encourage children to explore ideas, to learn critical thinking, to learn to evaluate ideas according to evidence, and to decide for themselves. You saw the opposite of this. You saw children being taught that global warming was wrong there's no indication that they were exposed to any evidence or allowed to their own conclusions. Perhaps the most extreme case of that was the young man, the boy Levi, who seemed to believe that Galileo gave up science and came back to the church. I'm still astonished by this. First of all, he seems to have been taught that there is a fundamental incompatibility between science and religion. And of course, there are many religious scientists who have figured out how to either compartmentalize the two belief systems or to harmonize them. Levi does not seem to have been given that option. Even more shocking was that Levi seems to have believed that Galileo voluntarily left science and chose religion instead. Actually, Galileo was tried by the Inquisition. He was threatened with torture, and he was put under house arrest for the remainder of his life. So he did not exactly voluntarily return to religion. In fact, there's no indication that he ever stopped being religious. He was just persecuted by the religious institutions for believing the wrong thing. Levi's education seems to have left these minor details out altogether. So you can see really strong examples of socialization in the homeschooling scenes. Elements of socialization that we viewed. We certainly saw values being transmitted. We even saw political values being transmitted. The idea that some people are enemies and there seemed to be almost a militaristic approach to conceiving of these children as warriors who would engage in a battle against enemies. Certainly we saw examples of beliefs, attitudes, norms. Even something as fundamental as body language. There seems to be certain types of body language that are being taught in this particular religion, and you saw examples of postures that children would take in their worship. They would look up in the air. They would hold their hands out in front of them with palms upward. They would seem to be encouraged to cry, to speak in tongues, and it's interesting to me that when these people speak in tongues, it's always with English accents and English syllables, but simply rearranged into gibberish. But this is part of what they are learning. As sociologists, we might observe the role of social class in how religions are organized. There was an interesting scene where the girl Rachel criticized people whose church services were too sedate, and she felt that church services, to be sufficient for her, needed to be more expressive and to have more dancing and clapping and loud music. Rachel is too young probably to understand that these are fundamentally social class differences, that the church services preferred by say the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants from old money. These are people who like sedate church services. They don't like to draw attention to themselves. They would not be caught dead in this kind of highly expressive church service that you see in the film. Meanwhile, people from lower income social classes tend to prefer the louder music and more expressive worship. And there are also racial ethnic differences as well. Rachel doesn't realize this yet, and she has apparently somehow learned that if your church service is too sedate, you're not sufficiently religious for her. There are some very interesting parts of the movie where Becky Fisher, the director of Jesus Camp, compares herself and her work with the indoctrination of Muslim children. She refers to Muslims as the enemy, and she seems to see her work as a counterpart to the socialization of Muslim children. And I'm wondering if this accounts for some of the militarism you see in the film, where children are described as warriors and are dressing up with camouflage and doing dances that seem aggressive. Now, we know that in the most extremist Muslim schools and churches, children can be socialized to engage in violence. There is no indication that Becky Fisher's camp encourages children to violence. However, did you notice that Rachel expressed that she was willing to die? She was not afraid to die for her religion. And this shows you how susceptible children are to this type of socialization. They can be taught to be warriors, unafraid of death, and to do almost anything on behalf of their religion. This raises the issue of extremism. I prefer to define extremism not as far right or far left, but rather as a political style. Extremists are people who tend to demonize their opponents. And having demonized and dehumanized people who disagree with you, it becomes acceptable to do almost anything to them, up to and including violence. Again, there's no indication that Jesus Camp is teaching violence, but it does seem to be extremist. It does seem to delegitimize, almost dehumanize people who disagree with them, in the sense of calling them the enemy. You see that example of extremism. I must admit to being ethnocentric. when I watched this film. Remember this term from our culture unit. It means to evaluate alien cultures according to your own personal values, norms, attitudes, and beliefs. While I was watching the movie, I was thinking, these people in the movie must feel so betrayed by the filmmakers. The filmmakers are making them look terrible. The filmmakers seem to have their finger on the scale. However, after seeing the movie and then going and researching how people felt about it, it seems that a lot of evangelicals found it to be a relatively accurate portrayal of their religion. Indeed, Becky Fisher did not seem to be too unhappy with how her camp was portrayed. And I realized that I was imposing my own values on the film when I watched it. I thought that that some of the music was overdubbed by the filmmakers, especially early scenes where the children are doing the most militaristic dancing and you hear ominous music. I thought the filmmakers were using the music score to make a comment. However, after watching the entire film, now I think that perhaps that music was actually part of the actual service. Another example of that is towards the end of the film where Becky Fisher is driving through a car wash and you see red water on her windshield. And as I was watching the film, I thought that this is the filmmakers. The filmmakers must have used some sort of filter to turn the water red and to make it look as if it was drenched in blood. Now I'm wondering if maybe there is a car wash that drops red liquid on your windshield. I don't really know. The point is that I brought my own values and attitudes towards the movie, and I was kind of shocked by what I saw, and that might cause me to misinterpret some of what's going on. We have a tool called cultural relativism. And again, this is from the culture unit. Cultural relativism is an attempt that researchers can make to set aside their own norms, values, and beliefs, at least temporarily, so that we can better understand the culture we are trying to learn about. And while I was watching the film, I thought I was doing that. I thought I was criticizing the filmmakers in my mind for having their finger on the scale and portraying these people unfairly. It turns out perhaps that maybe it was me who was viewing the content of the film from my own perspective and not sufficiently practicing cultural relativism. So what did I miss from being ethnocentric? I don't know. At the very least, I can say that this was an extremely intense movie, and I learned a lot about Jesus Camp.